Welcome back. Now, there continues to be mixed reaction to government's proposed compulsory national social security fund. And this after the Social Development Department published a green paper on a comprehensive social security and retirement reform. The paper suggests a compulsory social security pension for retirement, death and disability benefits for all workers. The department says that this will help millions of workers who are unable to access existing private sector options due to the country's structural inequalities and the high cost of private financial services. Labour consultant Tony Healy joins us now to discuss this and perhaps also just help us break down and understand this proposal better. Tony, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina.
So here's a message from Klanga on Twitter. He says, Sakina, we reject that proposed 12% deduction from our hard-earned money. This government wants us dead. I'm telling you, we are squeezed already. So perhaps a good place to start would be to just explain this proposal contained in the green paper from the Department of Social Development.
Well, Sakina, the first thing is it's been an idea in government circles for about 20 years. And we also know that social security systems of this nature are not new if you look globally. I mean, Europe has had social security benefits like this for decades, and New Zealand, Australia. So in principle, the idea of having some kind of compulsory mandatory pension savings process through government is not new. The challenge we face locally, though, is that the real question mark is, does government have the capacity to look after these funds and protect these funds? Because there are other examples where we're taxed and we don't get the kind of delivery for what that tax rand is used for, like proper policing, proper security, proper hospitals, proper schools.
So the department says, Tony, that this National Social Fund will help those who retire with reduced income or no income at all. And those will then obviously end up relying on the social grant. But how exactly is this meant to work? What are some of the pros and some of the cons of what is proposed?
So the basic idea at the moment, Sakina, and we must remember it is a green paper, which means it's an idea. That's all it is at the moment. So it's not government policy. It would become government policy if it became what we call a white paper or envisaged government policy. But the simple idea, Sakina, is that an employee would be, and employers would make contributions on a monthly basis. Up to about 2,700 Rand at the maximum. And those funds are gathered, they are collected, they're held in a central fund, and then they're used for various eventualities such as an income after retirement, death benefits if an employee dies at work, and it tops up other unemployment insurance benefits. So the idea is not a bad one. The dilemma we have is that we have such high employment. Money is tight in most households, and there are question marks over government's ability to be good custodians of these funds.
Let's talk about that, because government might argue that they are perfectly capable of doing this. But as you yourself pointed out, some would say it's a good idea, a good proposal, only if it is going to be managed properly. But how protected would these funds be from acts of corruption and malfeasance, given the history that we have, the litany of stories that have come out of entities such as the PIC? We heard from the PIC inquiry about how the government pension fund, for example, was mismanaged, if you will, how it invested recklessly in some instances, yielding no return, and no one has been held to account.
Well, therein lies the dilemma, Sakina. It's the confidence in government's ability to be good custodians of these funds. And how do we know how good they'll be? Well, the best way for now, and the only way now, is to look at how they've been good or if they've been good custodians in other areas. And you've just mentioned a few examples. And unfortunately, and it is unfortunate, the government doesn't have a great track record when it comes to being good custodians of the taxes that are collected and running certain state-owned entities, for example. So if that's our recent history and if that is the trend, then I think people like your caller have got good reason to be concerned about government's ability to look after their money.
So one of the other things that really stands out is that 8 to 12% in the proposal. But will this be applicable to only a certain section of the working class, or will it apply across the board, Tony?
Well, it would for now. The white paper, the green paper rather, is talking about it being applied to employees who earn between 20,000 rand per annum and 276,000 rand per annum. So it would apply. It would real low earners would not be contributing, and it would be peaked at about a 2,700 rand contribution for those at the higher end. But look, it's early days. It's just an idea. And another issue here is that we have such high unemployment, and we all know that the only real way to dig yourself out of a high unemployment scenario is to promote investment. And another question that must be asked is, to what extent will this dampen foreign investors' appetite to invest locally, or to what extent will it encourage it? And the chances are it's going to dampen that kind of enthusiasm.
Why though, Tony?
Well, it's going to increase the complexity of doing business. It's going to increase the tax obligations of employers, because we must remember that a system of this nature, a social security system of this nature, as good as it is under normal circumstances, is still a tax. And there are already so many challenges facing foreign investors, infrastructure, policy certainty, complexity of doing business, corporate tax. This is just another tax to some degree, and it's not going to necessarily be secure. So that could serve as a further disincentive for foreign investors, which are so important to us now when we're sitting with, for example, youth unemployment north of 60%.
And then, of course, there's the debt question. Debt Council, Debt Busters. Now, they've shown that South African consumers' state of indebtedness is getting worse. They say that the average debt-to-income ratio is at its highest rate ever, and that the question then becomes whether the workforce is actually able to afford an additional deduction of 8 to 12%. Won't people be even more indebted for their day-to-day living if we have such a tax imposed?
Well, the dilemma faced by low wage earners is that they're struggling to make ends meet as things are. And we have so many minimum wage earners, especially now with the pandemic. So, and that's why we're seeing, for example, a government initiative that says that one can potentially access retirement savings, which wouldn't happen in normal circumstances. And yet at the same time, we're talking about imposing potentially a 12% deduction on wages when it's already so hard for many to make ends meet on a monthly basis. Now, we must understand that the chances are, by the time this initiative becomes law, if it does, and it probably will, in time, we will hopefully be past the pandemic. But that doesn't change the fact that we're likely to still be sitting with a very high unemployment rate. So, and the man and woman in the street are saying, you know what, we can't get by on our current take-home pay. How are we going to get by with 12% less to provide for a future that we might not even be able to realize because we can't eat today?
And of course, the triple threat of poverty, unemployment and inequality. And reading through this proposal, it seems as though government is trying to close the inequality gap because the paper refers to the problem as being one where, it's as a result of structural challenges that we face, where many are still poverty-stricken, excluded from such benefits as a result. But do you believe, Tony, that this will actually assist in reducing poverty?
if the system, if we end up with a system, Sakina, that is functional, where government are good custodians of these funds, then of course we must remember this is not a bad idea. The question is, can it be administered properly? Will the funds be secure? Do we have a wage regime that allows employees to have these kinds of deductions made? Because it is a laudable idea. The question is government capable of managing it securely and professionally?
If we look at the labor force in the country, many unskilled workers, how's this likely to impact on that sector?
Well, depends on the model that's ultimately adopted. So unskilled workers still earn in many vocations around the country. And if we can increase employment and have a system, a social security system like this that is secure and run professionally, then it will assist them enormously in time. But there are just too many question marks around government's ability to do those things.
Yeah, and then we're seeing so many comments coming through, many concerned about the cost factor as well, Tony. The DA, for example, has already opposed the proposal, warning that the introduction of a national security fund will actually lead to a steeper monthly tax on working South Africans. So is that likely to be the case? Because, as we say, the tax base keeps shrinking, and it seems as though that little pool of taxpayers just keep getting squeezed and squeezed to within an inch of its life.
That's right, and it is a form of indirect tax, and as you rightly said, the tax rates are already particularly high, which in and of itself is not a problem as long as you're getting bang for your buck in your tax rand. But the challenge we're faced with is that we don't. So we pay for a police service, but we have to pay for extra private security. We pay for schooling, but we have to try and supplement that to improve the schooling. The same goes for hospital. We pay for hospitals, but they're in poor shape and not well run. So generally speaking, so the same applies here. What faith is the man of is an employee going to have, or an employer for that matter, in what government is doing with this money that goes towards the system?
So is there anything that could be done that would make this proposal anyway attractive to the ordinary South African? Because as it stands right now, especially when you talk about an 8 to 10% tax levy, it doesn't look attractive, Tony.
It doesn't, and I think there are bigger fish to fry at the moment. I mean, the unemployment situation is perhaps the most serious. It's a crisis. It's a crisis, and to have north of 40% of the economically active population out of work is terrible. To have 70% youth unemployment is terrible. We should be doing things, in my view, to encourage investment, because that will promote employment and that will put employees on all levels and increase the number of employed. And that could address questions of inequality, and that could address questions of poverty. And then once we manage to make progress in that direction, then we can have a proper look at how you can implement a social security system.
Speaking of social security systems, the basic income grant, that has also been discussed in many circles for many years. But how close are we to actually having that being a reality, given the levels of unemployment that we have in the country?
I think at a national level, Takina, one of government's many dilemmas at the moment. And listen, who would want their job? It's a terrible, terrible time to be governing. But be that as it may, it's a question of directing funds. We see from a security point of view that the police minister is talking about having insufficient funds for policing, and the same applies to social security grants. There's only so much government can do. and they've been hammered with the pandemic in terms of what has to be spent at national level to try and manage our way through this. But the social grant is something that's of value already, and it will no doubt continue to be of value. But it comes from government coffers which are under immense strain. So I think, to answer your question, the social grant, we have it. It's being improved gradually. It's minimal. It's better than nothing for many. But there are just too many claims on Treasury for funds across the globe.
Tony Healy, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Labour consultant Tony Healy talking to us about scrutinising government's proposed social security and retirement reform green paper. And of course, as the public, everyone welcome to give their view. It is a proposal. It's a green paper at this stage, but it would be interesting to, get your views heard on this particular matter. I think it's something that we really need to get on board with as South Africans, whereby we do make our voices heard, and it's not just these same entities over and over who give their views at the time of policy formulation. So we'll leave that one there, and please, if you can, go and have your say on this particular matter. And
that's where we leave it.
For our
SABC2 viewers. We've still got an hour coming. Also, just another news event that is taking place today, just to update viewers. I just see now, remember the trial of both the EFF leader Julius Malema and his co-accused bodyguard Adrian Snyman will begin in East London at the Magistrates Court today in the Eastern Cape. Remember, this was where he was charged with the illegal possession of a firearm, illegal possession of ammunition, as well as the contravention of the Firearm Controls Act. And this was where this was the discharging of that.
At the birthday celebration.
The birthday celebration. So that's happening. That is happening today, as well as keeping a close eye on anything that's happening in terms of the shutdown, but nothing as yet. So that's what we've got for you this morning. Have a beautiful day, everybody, and thanks for watching us. See you tomorrow.